First, let's use an extreme example. Someone like Hitler, who never got judged in this life, shouldn't get any judgment in the next life. Do you think that's fair? That's right?
Imagine believing in a creator, believing in life after death, but rejecting the idea of divine judgment. No heaven, no hell, no accountability. But here's the challenge. If there's no judgment, what are we saved from? Would it be fair if someone like Hitler never faced justice beyond this life? Is rejecting judgment really about truth or about avoiding accountability?
Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Savannah.
Savannah, go ahead.
So what would you say to an agnostic individual who believes in the existence of a creator God, creator of the universe, believes in life after death, but doesn't believe in divine judgment, doesn't believe that he or she will stand before God one day and be judged?
I would ask them why they think that. How did you come to that conclusion? What do you mean? There's not going to be any judgment? Do you think it's wrong to, first, let's use an extreme example. Someone like Hitler, who never got judged in this life, shouldn't get any judgment in the next life? Do you think that's fair? That's right? Let's see what they say.
So let's say those questions were asked, and they believe that they got their punishment on earth, right?
So I think this person probably in her heart knows that there has to be a judgment. And she's suppressing that because she might want to do her own thing. In fact, Let me give you a story that happened when I was down in Dallas a couple of 4 or 5 years ago. We were at the book table after we had done our talk, me and a couple other guys, J. Warner Wallace, and this lady came up to us and said, "Hey, do you got any books on Buddhism?" And I said, "Buddhism? Why Buddhism?" She said, "Well, you know, my friend used to be a Christian, but she's a Buddhist now." And I said, "Look, I don't know your friend at all, but let me just ask you this question. Did your friend recently start doing something that Christians, that the Bible would consider immoral?" And she said, "Well, yeah." I said, "You don't need a book on Buddhism. She's not a Buddhist because she thinks Buddhism's true. She's a Buddhist because she wants to have spirituality without moral accountability."
Yeah.
That's what she wants. Now, there is a moral accountability in some Buddhism. You know, you got the Eightfold Path and all that. But that's all going to be extinguished. You're going to be extinguished at some point in Buddhism. She just doesn't want moral accountability. She wants to say, "I'm spiritual," but she doesn't want to have to say, "Nobody's the boss of me. I get to do what I want."
Right.
That's my New York accent. Anyway, so I think that quite often is the reason. And maybe you ought to ask her, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If Jesus really was not only the Savior, but also a judge, would you bow your knee? I mean, why did Jesus have to come if there's no judgment? What are we saved from if there's no judgment? What's the point?
Right.
There isn't. So I would just ask some questions. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you, Savannah.
The question posed by Savannah in this Candace session is one that resonates deeply in today's culture. Many people claim to believe in God, but they reject the idea of divine judgment. They may see God as a loving creator, but struggle with the notion that he would hold people accountable for their actions, especially in an eternal sense. Savannah's question reflects a broader issue in modern spirituality. Can we accept God without accepting his authority? Savannah was trying to explore a belief system where one acknowledges the existence of God and life after death, but denies the concept of divine judgment. This is a position some people take for several reasons. Desire for a loving but non-judgmental God. Many people are comfortable with the idea of a higher power, but reject the notion of accountability because it makes them uncomfortable. Belief in earthly justice. Some believe that judgment happens within this life, that bad people will eventually face consequences for their actions before they die, making divine judgment unnecessary. Spirituality. Without moral accountability. Some want to hold on to spiritual beliefs, but without the weight of responsibility that comes with divine justice. Frank Turek's response to this question exposes a major flaw in this way of thinking. He approaches the issue by asking logical and moral counter-questions that challenge the assumption that judgment can be avoided or dismissed. Turek begins by asking Savannah to consider whether it is truly fair for someone like Hitler to never be judged. If we believe in a God who is just, it follows that justice must be fully realized even beyond this life. The fundamental problem with rejecting divine judgment is that it creates an incoherent worldview. If there is no final judgment, then ultimate justice does not exist. If God does not judge evil, then morality itself becomes meaningless. If some people can escape consequences, then what is the real motivation to do good? Even those who deny divine judgment instinctively desire justice. We all react strongly to acts of evil in the world and expect that people should be held accountable. Yet, if we remove God's judgment, then who decides what justice looks like? Turek presents an interesting observation. Many people who reject divine judgment do so not because of deep theological reasoning, but because they don't want accountability. He shares a story of a woman whose friend left Christianity and embraced Buddhism. When asked why, it became clear that her friend didn't necessarily find Buddhism to be more true. Instead, she was looking for spirituality without moral restrictions. This is a crucial point. Rejecting judgment is often not about logic, but about personal desires. Many people do not want to submit to a God who will hold them accountable, so they redefine God in a way that makes them comfortable. This raises an important question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? One of the most powerful parts of Turek's response is when he asks, why did Jesus have to come if there's no judgment? This question gets to the heart of the gospel. Many people love the idea of Jesus as a savior, but a savior from what? The very concept of salvation assumes that humanity is guilty of sin. There are consequences for sin, judgment. Jesus came to take that judgment upon himself. If there is no divine judgment, then what is Jesus saving us from? This is why the rejection of judgment ultimately undermines the Christian faith itself. God's justice and love are inseparable. He cannot simply ignore evil. Justice demands that it must be dealt with. The cross is meaningless without judgment. If sin has no consequences, then Jesus' sacrifice was unnecessary. A God without judgment is not truly loving. If God simply lets things go, then he is not truly just. Real love involves justice. Savannah's question is an important one because it reflects a widespread attitude in modern culture, the belief that we can shape God into our own preferences. But as Turek points out, truth is not based on personal comfort. Rejecting judgment does not remove the reality of judgment. Denying divine accountability does not change God's justice. The existence of morality itself proves the need for a final judgment. At the end of the day, God's judgment is not about cruelty, it is about justice. If we truly desire a fair and just universe, then we should welcome the idea that a perfect and all-knowing God will ultimately set things right. The real question we must all ask ourselves is, if Christianity is true, am I willing to accept all of it, including the reality of divine judgment?